Crammed with over 100 tactical nuclear weapons, heavy armour, and high-powered electronic warfare jamming, Kaliningrad was built to be Vladimir Putin's ultimate spearhead into the heart of Europe. Now, that threat has been turned on its head. As Poland constructs its multi-billion euro East Shield and NATO locks down the Baltic Sea, Russia's most dangerous forward base is finding itself completely cut off. Is Kaliningrad still a terrifying nuclear fortress, or has it just become a prison?
Castles always had that kind of quality. They had the ability to be able to provide a defence, and also for the people inside the castles to be able to sally forth to attack outwards. But if they became besieged, they then basically turned into a prison, and that's where they are. And I think Kaliningrad is now turning into that from there. But it is a much larger area than traditional forts, and of course it is very heavily armed. So I think that the intention would be never to directly attack Kaliningrad, but basically to leave it, to isolate it, and as the military say, to wither on its spine. But nonetheless, it remains a kind of potent source of threat against Poland, Lithuania, but also the Baltic as well. What Putin has now done is established inside the Kaliningrad exclave a significant military presence. It's always been a fairly armed element of Russia. It held, for example, the port for the Baltic Sea fleet, but more recently it's been reinforced into a very large joint base, including the use of tactical nuclear weapons. And the estimate now is some 100 tactical nuclear weapons inside that. It's also got a significant electronic warfare presence, and we've seen this being used to try and interfere with the communications and the navigation systems of aircraft, including against a previous British Defence Secretary, and the RAF had to use reversionary mode in order to conduct the navigation. So Kaliningrad has always been this kind of window out onto the west. In more peaceful times, the Russians saw it as a commercial window out into the west, and indeed the immediate aftermath of the Cold War, everyone hoped it might turn into. But it's now turned into a military window onto the west, and by putting tactical nuclear weapons in that place, then Putin could offer to basically threaten across most of the Baltic and well into the Eastern European countries as well. So Poland obviously is very concerned by the threat that Russia and its ally Belarus can pose to it. It's concerned not necessarily for direct attack out of Kaliningrad itself, though a diversionary attack might be possible. But two possible scenarios arise. One is an attack through Belarus into Lithuania to try and block off land access into the Baltics as far as NATO is concerned, or indeed some kind of provocation, which again provokes challenges around the region. And so what Poland's done is a number of things. One of the most important things to do is creating its own East Shield. And the East Shield program is a very significant military defence program costing billions of euros, which not only produces kind of physical barrier across the almost the entirety of the border with Kaliningrad down into Belarus as well. So the whole kind of L-shape, inverted L-shape, is going to be covered by these physical barriers. But behind it, it's got electronic surveillance, it's got counter-drone technology, and it's then integrated with other elements of Polish defence, including the acquisition of new satellite systems, integrated air defence through the Patriot battery to provide a significant shield, hence its name, against Russian aggression in the area. But also significantly, it's very much tied into the programme which has been run by the Baltic countries. And they are setting up what they call the Baltic Defence Line, which is the programme that runs essentially from the Estonian border right in the far north, all the way down to the Lithuanian border with the Suwalki Gap. Now, this is a large area, and not all of it can be completed immediately. Even the Poles, even all the effort that's been put into it, and we're now right, literally 26, 28 is absolutely the height of the actual implementation of the program themselves, will probably only have completed about 38% of it by the end of this year. But their intention is by 2028 to have completed the whole of the East Shield physical barrier program. What is important to understand is it's not just one element of it which is important. So it's not just having, for example, the air defence of the Patriot batteries. It's the combination of static defensive positions with reinforce and to slow down, to catalyse any Russian advances, and then reaction forces behind them who can contain them. But also not just in terms of physical attacks across any boundaries, but the whole range of potential attack routes which the Russians can now do, and that includes cyber, ballistic, and air attacks on there. So what the Poles have been doing is producing a comprehensive joint and combined arms response to the range of threats that Russia can force and against them. And we recognise that the Russians are probably not going to directly attack for the sake of gaining territory these countries immediately. What we do know, though, is that Russia is intensely opportunistic, particularly under Putin, and basically does not believe that NATO's Article 5 agreement to mutual defence is worth the paper it's written on. And he's identified the Baltic states as an area whereby there will be elements of NATO who will not respond to that, which is why these kind of joint exercises where we see Poland, Lithuania, Germany and other countries working together is so important, because it creates an atmosphere whereby it's normal to work and cooperate and fight together, but also produces an additional threat and challenge for Russia, because it can't do what it thinks it can do, which is pick off one country after another. So I think that's the important thing that's changing over time. It does take time, though, and of course we don't know quite when Russia, and Putin particularly, might choose to threaten NATO. We've seen him already with hybrid attacks. We've seen with attempted penetrations of Estonian airspace, disinformation campaigns, and all those things there. And he's also got, of course, a sort of ready-made casus belli, a reason for going to war, in terms of what he would accuse of discrimination or worse against the minority ethnic Russian populations in the Baltic states. So that is what we're up against at the moment, a range of threats across the whole domain, across all domains that Russia could pose. And that's why you see, particularly in the way in which Poland's putting together defences, but also the Baltic countries as well, is they're looking to produce counters across the whole of those threat spectrums that Russia could offer. What we can see significantly now is that the previous couple of years, there was a lot of planning going on. What we're now seeing is the implementation of those programs, and so we're not only seeing the physical construction of the barriers themselves, but we're seeing a significant ramping up of joint exercise and training programs between Poland and the neighbouring nations. Most evident, perhaps, in the joint program, the Bold Griffin and Gallant Boar programs organised between Poland and Lithuania. And also, interesting, the very first deployment of a permanent military base by Germany since 1945 has been established in Lithuania itself. It's called the 45th Armour Brigade, and it will have a permanent German presence in there, as say the first permanent German presence overseas since 1945. So we're now in this implementation phase. There was a lot of warning, a lot of planning going on in the period 24 through 25, but the programs are now starting to come through, and it's matched by Polish defence expenditure. Polish defence expenditure now is reaching some 4.8% of GDP, nearly twice what we're spending from GDP on defences, and that's now starting to come through in terms of new equipment, as I said, training and readiness, and the construction of the East Shield programme. One of the things that's perhaps most striking for someone like myself, who's been watching this for years, is literally how powerful the Polish military are at the moment. They absolutely recognise the threat which they are facing from Russia and Putin's ambitions to destabilise the Baltics and to destabilise NATO, and they've responded. And they respond extremely effectively. They've created the political will and desire to defend themselves properly, and they've matched that with the resources. As I said, 4.8% of GDP is now being spent on their defences, and they're rapidly turning themselves into Europe's leading military power. This is extremely challenging, perhaps, for people like the British, in particular, who always saw themselves as the second power in NATO. But certainly in terms of land power, particularly, Poland is probably right at the top of the league, and they are being rewarded. They're regarded as best of allies by the Americans, and that has political implications and economic implications in terms of resources, in terms of attitudes, in terms of behaviours.